Yeah, so we are right at 7:30 or 9:30. I see lots of people rolling in as we go, but we're going to go ahead and get started on time here to respect everyone's time. Welcome. Thanks a lot for joining us this morning. I think I can speak for Jerry as well when I say that we really wish this would have been an in-person event. We were talking about it, hoping we could do it, but obviously life, like business, requires us to adapt and overcome. And so here we are. We'll do our best on Zoom. I'd much rather be in the same room with all of you, but we'll make the best of it. And appreciate you guys joining us this morning. So if there's new people in the group, I think Jerry mentioned we had some newcomers that might not know so much about Conduit. So just a real quick jib about Conduit. We are a tribe of leaders. I know myself, I sometimes struggle to think about myself as a leader. So maybe for you, those clothes are a little bit odd fitting as well. But we're across all business disciplines. And what we know is that there's a big advantage to sharing our experiences and our insights with our peers. And I love the tagline that Jerry came up with years ago, we all get better together, because that's really sort of the core heart to me of Conduit. We're all living through daily battles, and we share and learn from one another all the time. So that's like the core and the heart of Conduit. And I'll say more about that at the end of the session, because we're going to get you started on some things today. And we want to also give you some options to continue the work that you're going to do today. Couple quick housekeeping items for today. We are recording this, so you'll get emailed a link to watch the recording. You should have a workbook that got emailed to you. You're going to need that a little later in the session. It is in the chat. You should be able to download it out of the chat if you didn't get it in the email. If you cannot see it in the chat or can't get it, just chat in on that real quick, and we'll try to get that to you before the first breakout session. Speaking of the chat, I'm going to have you post some responses in the chat as we go along. So familiarize yourself with that. One of the upsides to the pandemic I've found is lots and lots more people are familiar with Zoom. So makes that easier to do. We'll be sending you into some breakout rooms. Nothing for you to do there. Rebecca's going to magically sweep you in and out of them. But be prepared to engage and interact with your colleagues as we go along. So here is your first opportunity to share something in the chat. Tell me, what is it that you hope to get out of today's session? One of the fascinating things I find about these sessions is that I talk with people later sometimes after them, and they say, well, here's something I really took away, it stuck with me. And very often it's something that wasn't what I had intended, which is a great thing because everybody gets what they need at the time they need it. So if you could just throw in the chat real quick, what would you like to see? What would you like to get out of today's session? Learn from perspective of others. That's good. Open your mind to new ideas, developing team. Insights on how to best lead people. That's an ongoing growth, isn't it? Positively motivate staff. How to develop working plans. Actionable advice. Motivate and encourage people. Good. Good stuff. Thank you very much for sharing all those. How to pass leadership qualities on to others. I like that. Sharpening skills. Good. Those are all kind of things that we're gonna touch on a lot of that today. Excellent. Excellent. What you're gonna find is as we go along, I'm not gonna stop a lot throughout this process to get questions, just because I have a lot of material to get through and I want to stay on time. We will have time at the end for questions though. So if things come up for you in the breakouts as we go along, jot those down. We'll make space at the end, and then Jerry and I will stay even a little extra long for those of you who have time to hang out and ask more questions. We'll stick around for some even more discussion. So here's how this is going to go today. We're going to introduce a few topics. We're going to break it into three chunks that are the big picture of empowering your people. First one is setting the bar. So we're going to talk a lot about results and standards. That can be deceptively easy. So we're going to talk about these are also deceptively hard. And it's about clearly defining the outcomes and standards for your team. And then we'll talk about showing the way. So once we define what the standards are, then how are you going to actually get them? How should your team go about getting those standards and hitting those results? And then, of course, supporting success. So coaching, equipping, training, making sure that people have what they need to actually do what it is that you're asking them to do. So interestingly, the word empower, I always tell Jerry when we talk about this that empower is one of my favorite and least favorite words in business jargon because it gets so overused and misunderstood. But Merriam-Webster tells us that it's having the knowledge, confidence, means, or ability to do things or make decisions for oneself. That last part, do things or make decisions for oneself. Something I hear business owners just begging for a lot is how do I get my people to do that? So to truly empower others, you have to provide them with the knowledge, the confidence, the means, all these things so that they can make those decisions for themselves. Does that sound simple? See, the truth is, there's a lot more to empowering people than most people think. When I hear people say, oh, my people are empowered, I told them, go solve it, make it work. That's abdication, by the way. That's not empowering. That's just pushing the responsibility to do what you're supposed to do as a leader off on them. So to get a team that is empowered, you have to be empowering. And that can be intimidating because it might make you feel like you have to be Superwoman like this or Superman and have superpowers or be an awesome motivating speaker or something like that to get them. So it can feel really ominous and make you feel that way. But when you became a manager, an owner, a leader, all three, you didn't become someone's boss. The truth is, good people rarely need a boss. What they do need is somebody to provide them with the clarity and the resources and the authority that they need to use the skills that they already have and their desire that they already have to win and be good at what they do. And they already want to do that. Now, if you're thinking, well, if they have the skills and the desire to win, isn't my work done? Can't I just turn them loose and let them do the work? Well, it isn't quite that simple. And yes, you did hire them to do the work. But when you hire someone, they come prepackaged with the way they've always done things. It's just natural. Or the way their last company did things. If you don't give them the way you want it done in a clear manner, then why would they not just keep doing it the way they do it? They would. So back to truly empowering. My goal this morning is to truly empower you, to truly empower your team. See, they say knowledge is power, and I get where that comes from, but I disagree with it. I think turning knowledge into action is power. See, we all have probably a shelf full of business books. If I were in my office at home, you'd see them behind me. But when you can take knowledge and turn it into actionable power, actionable things for you and your team to do, that's real power. So in our limited time today, we're not going to complete all the work that you're going to see in the workbook that you have. But that's not the point. The point today for me is to give you the tools and the ability to complete the work that we'll outline so that you'll be empowered to then empower your people through turning your knowledge and their knowledge into an actionable way of getting the results that you want them to get. So real quick, another feedback from you. In the chat, what do you find difficult about empowering others? What's difficult when you think about empowering your team? What do you struggle with? They don't want to be empowered. That's interesting. So motivation, a question of motivation maybe. Giving up control. Thanks for your honesty. They make weak excuses. Consistency. Trust. Just want to dump problems on their boss's lap. I love the honesty in our group today, Jerry. I'm a control freak. There's some good honesty. I'm with you, Cinda. Providing enough info, workout, micromanage. Yep. Yeah, providing enough info without micromanaging. Yeah. Wait, I have to give up authority? I love that one. Thanks, Aaron. Here's the great thing about these responses. All of them are tied to what we're talking about today, because a lot of times the fear of giving up authority, and I truly do share that one, or giving up control really, effort of training someone up versus doing it myself. Thanks, Jess. That's a good one too. That's a big block. That's a big barrier because we're stuck in sort of getting instant gratification, and investing in people and empowering people is a long-term investment. There's no question about it. I hope nobody showed up today thinking I had a magic wand for you, because I don't. Empowering is work. It really is. Can relate to Jess. Yep, Jess, you struck a chord there with a lot of people. So here's the thing. All of the things that you're sharing, which thanks a lot, those are all great things, they're usually tied to this missing underlying piece. And I think what we're going to talk about today is going to address a lot of those pieces. So let's go ahead and dig in. Step one is setting the bar. Now, here's the kind of interesting thing today. I'm not likely to share, I hope this doesn't make a bunch of people log out. I'm not likely to share like a bunch of revolutionary information that you've never heard before. Remember, knowledge is not power. Using that knowledge for action is power. That's what my hope for you today is, to give you the ability to use stuff that maybe you already know, or maybe things you'll hear today, to actually take steps and get results out of it. So let's talk about setting the bar, results and standards. So the late great Stephen Covey said, let's begin with the end in mind. And that's exactly what we have to do. Because here's the thing, you cannot, at least not if you're a fair, honest person, I think everybody on this call is, you cannot hold your people accountable for results, for outcomes that you have not made crystal clear for them and given them everything they need to get those. And I think that we all know this instinctively, and it's often what makes accountability a more emotional thing than it really needs to be. Because see, when you're focused on the activities, the actual actions people are taking, accountability often feels like nitpicking to you and to your team. And so you tend to avoid it because it feels like you're nitpicking the way someone's doing their work. But when you're focused on results, you eliminate that, because the result either is or isn't happening. And you have a clear, measurable way to address that and then start to dig into the underlying issues of why it is or isn't happening. So let's talk about what a well-defined result is. This is, again, I'll say this over and over, it's deceptively easy and it's deceptively hard at the same time. What it's not is it's not the activities or the steps that people are taking to do the work. It's not the technical skills that are required to do the work. Lots of times when I say, what do you want your team to do? Well, I want them to do this, 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 this. Yes, but what outcome are you going to get? So what a result is it's a clear picture of a finished product. It's a clear picture of what you want to happen because of the steps that are in that process. So also think of this as a statement. What's the purpose? Why are we doing this process to begin with? Why are we taking these steps or following this system? What's the end result? What are we after? That's also another way to look at it. What do we want to accomplish? So let's talk a little bit about an example. I'm going to use an invoicing system as an example, because it's every business out there has to get paid. So you've got to get something to your customers to get paid one way or another. And interestingly, it might be because it's tied to money. I see a lot of business owners struggle with invoicing and handing it off to someone. So if we were working on an invoicing system, which we are together this morning, what would be a good result of an invoicing system? Think about that for a minute. If your own invoicing system, if you were going to delegate and empower an employee to do your invoicing for you, give up control, Jess, then what would be the result of that system? How would you tell them the result they get? So we might say that clients will receive an accurate invoice for completed services. I told you this was deceptively easy. It's also deceptively hard though, because we're not done. This is just the beginning. There's more work to it than this. And everything in your business won't quite be this simple. Some things are far more tricky to define a clear result. But this is the foundation of getting the rest of it right. So what I'd like you to do is look at our sample result statement there. Clients receive an accurate invoice for completed services. Seems straightforward and simple. In the chat, throw in there what you notice about it. What does it have that's important? And what is it missing? Because it is missing some things. What is it missing that we would need to help our employees actually get this right? So quality level, thanks Chad, good one. What does accurate mean? Love that, Emily. Get paid. Yeah, missing timeline, deadline. Beautiful, Carrie. When? When, Jerry, I assume you mean when do we actually do the invoicing? Understand to the customer. Yep, good. So what you're picking up on is it needs a little more detail, right? It has to have a little more detail. It is in its simple method, email, SNAMA, yep, good one. It is in its simple form a decent result, isn't it? Because it is clear, we can tell, was the client invoiced or were they not? But we do need to add some more information to it to make it have more clarity. That's where standards come in. So we're going to talk about three major parts in this section, and that is your results, your standards, and your metrics. They're things that sometimes people get a little intimidated by hearing them because, oh my God, what's a metric and how do I get it? It's not as hard as it sounds because these are so closely related together. So standards are how we know if someone's getting the result correctly, just as you also astutely picked out. So this is where the standards come into play to give a clear explanation or measurement that establishes things like quality, quantity, timing, behavior, etc. So they're further clarification. So if we stick with our invoicing result, like we mentioned before, and a lot of you picked up on this already, which is great. Some of our standards might be, to Jerry's point, invoices will be sent every Friday before noon. So that could be a standard for our invoicing. All invoices will include a breakdown of hours and materials if your business has that sort of thing. All invoices will be emailed as PDF files. So we might even specify in the standards, how are the clients going to get the invoices? Invoices will be accompanied by an email that provides the client with contact info for someone to call if they have questions, right? So there's just lots and lots of things that you can add in as a standard to say, this is the result we want. Here's the specifics of how that result has to look. And it's because, I forget who said it, but someone said, what does accurate mean? I love that. In coaching, we have a term we use called symbolic expressions. And almost anything can be a symbolic expression. You can say things, well, you need to invoice them in a timely way. Well, what does a timely way mean? Well, in this case, one example I gave you was by Friday at noon. That's a timely way. So we've defined it. We've taken the symbolism out of that expression. Accurate. What does accurate mean? Right? So you can define all these. These are the things that as we go quickly, as someone added in earlier, taking the time to train someone versus doing it ourselves, this is why it can be very difficult to empower your employees to do these things instead of you being stuck doing them, because you're not taking the time to dig in deeply enough in these ways to lay this out. And these are almost always the places where frustration lies, because they're interpreted differently by different people. And you want to eliminate those as much as possible. Now, let's talk about metrics, the third of the three musketeers here. Metrics are simply the things you'll measure to see if the results and standards are being met. So how would we use measurements on our invoicing system? What would we measure? Well, we could measure the dates on the invoices potentially. You could look at your cash flow reports to see how cash is coming in. You could look at accounts receivable reports to see when our invoice is going out, when are we catching getting the cash into our bank account. These are all things that are going to show you, are the standards being met? Are these things going out? And they're not magic. What I want you to do is really simplify this process, because when you've identified your result, you've identified the standards that have to be met, you just look in your business and look for how you'll measure if those standards are met. And hint, sometimes you're going to have to create them. Sometimes you don't have a way to measure the metrics that you want to measure, and then find out a way to get those numbers in front of you on a regular basis. You hear the term all the time, running the business by the numbers. It's a good term. Most people think it's about looking at their P&L. It's not that. There are lots and lots of numbers that you can track and use to let you know if the work is being done correctly or not being done correctly. That's what metrics are. They give you the vision into what's going on in your business without you having to actually be there doing it yourself. So all of you who said giving up authority or giving up control, take a deep breath with me. When you set all these things in place, you can start to do that. You're not actually giving up control. You actually have a way to monitor what's going on in the business. Okay, let's keep rolling along here. We're going to get into our first breakout session. Before Rebecca sweeps you magically into a breakout room, take a minute and think about something in your own business. I recommend you take something small, but it's that burr in the saddle that you have a hard time delegating, something that's been a little frustrating, because when you give it up, you're either afraid expectations won't be met, or you've had the experience where they haven't been met, something that comes back to you with questions a lot when you try to engage someone else to complete it. So give that a thought for a minute. And when you get into your breakout rooms, there's going to be about 3 of you because of the maybe odd or even numbers of people in the group. Some of you might end up with 4 in your group. We're going to try to keep you in 3 so that there's plenty of engagement. In your workbook, starting on page 2, you're going to start working on results, standards, and metrics. We're going to give you 6 minutes together in the breakout room, so make the most of it. And jot down some of your own, or choose one person in your group to work on theirs, but really challenge one another to come up with a measurable results statement and make sure it doesn't have activities in it saying, we're going to do this, do this, do this. We'll get to that, I promise. So Rebecca, if you want to wave your Zoom wand and sweep us all into breakout rooms, go right ahead. Okay, Rebecca's giving me the thumbs up that everybody should be back in now. So welcome back. Hopefully you had some fun with your group of awesome 3 participants in your breakout room and got some feel for the nuances of results and standards and metrics, and got some feel for the relationship between those 3 things and how they're going to work together. They're actually the foundation for what we're going to go into from this point forward. It's so critical. I cannot stress enough how important it is to do the results and standards first. You'll add to them and edit them as we go. But without a clear vision of where you're going, you're likely to be solving the wrong problem, creating the wrong solutions as you work along. So let's talk about, try not to, showing the way sounded more exciting than systems. Try not to yawn when we talk about systems, because I realize that only geeks like me will get excited about creating systems, but they really are freedom for you. If you're an owner manager who's trying to empower your people, they are where the rubber meets the road. So I've heard them called a lot of different things. And when I mentioned that defining results can be deceptively hard, defining the steps in the process is actually even more deceptively hard, because it's easy to think that because you know how to do something, that you can explain it to someone else. And that is just not the case. So procedures, systems, SOPs, action plans, I just want to let you know, I hear them called a lot of different things, a lot of different names. And for this morning, I'll use them interchangeably. I don't really care. I really don't care which one we use for this morning. So I just want to make sure that if I jump back and forth between them, you know that that's why I'm doing them. So as you think about defining how we do it here, jump in your chat again and tell me, what is it that comes to mind for you when you think about defining how we do it here, defining how you want things done? What comes to mind for you? Anything, whatever pops in your head, good, bad, or indifferent, what comes to mind for you when you think about defining the way you want things done? Ashley, creating a written process, giving history how you got there, that can be really good. Yep. Follow protocols that are in place. Yep. Always have the customer in mind. Good one, Chad. Love that as a deep-seated principle value as to what you're doing. Yeah, Brian, why are we doing this? Predictable outcomes. Yep. Company methodology. Yeah, good stuff. Measurable. There's the word I knew was going to come up. Consistent. Thanks, Lori. Explain the why. Yep. More than one, explain the why. It is interesting how much harder we work at things when we understand why we're doing it, isn't it? Isn't that true? I mean, as business owners and managers, we sometimes wonder Why won't our people work that hard? Maybe they don't get the why. That's a good thing to keep in mind. So by creating results and standards first, you now have a compass, a way to look at what are the steps that need to get done to actually get this result. Because without that, you might, like I said, solve the wrong problem. So it's so important that we start there. So one of the things that comes up when you define how you want it done your way can be some resistance, where you're hearing people say, well, I've been doing it this way for 10 years. Why should I change now and do it your way? Or my way gets the same result yours does. Why can't I just do it my way? You might even hear you're just stubborn and you want things done your way. Okay, that last one I threw in from my own experience. But you can eliminate these conversations, or at least limit them significantly, when you get a clear result and you stay focused on that result, because now you can co-create with your team about how to actually get to that result. And you can also identify and start to, hold on to this one, let go of your own predisposition to do things exactly your way. If you've been getting a good result your way for a long time, it can be very difficult to let that go. And when you stay clearly focused on the result you're after, you can sometimes identify that that's actually what's getting in your way. And the discussion keeps your team from staying focused on the things you're stepping to get, but focused on the result, not on who's right or who's wrong or whose way is the best. The result decides that. So if the team member does have a method that gets a result that meets all of your standards, meets your result, meets what you want, and you still don't like it, then what do? Well, you might have just discovered a new standard if you're still got a problem with what it is they came up with. So, be ready to identify those. You might have a legitimate reason for not liking it, and you may need to define an additional standard as to why that's a problem. Maybe sometimes, though, you do just need to swallow your pride. That's hard, I know. If their way does truly get the result and it's within your standards, you might have to just swallow your pride and say, it's okay if we do it that way, as long as we're getting the outcome. What you don't want to do is you don't want to waste your time and damage your relationship with your team by digging your heels in on an opinion where it really doesn't matter, where it really is a personal preference. So this is one of my favorite ways to geek out. When we think about creating the process, I think of it as a couple of steps, probably more than a couple of steps, but a couple of big steps. And I like to start by defining the overall process steps, what we sometimes call benchmarks, and decisions. That's an important thing that are in the workflow. So you see this example workflow I created for our make-believe invoicing process. These are the major steps. We're not defining the nitty-gritty of it just yet. We'll get to that. So you want to identify what starts it. If you remember, we talked about result. We said, when will we create? When will we get this result? Well, maybe it's every Friday by noon. So the starting point for this thing to be done, the kickoff, the trigger, would be Friday at noon. So what starts it? And then what ends it? We know the result, of course, is what ends it when we get the result. And a really critical thing, what are the decisions that are made along the way? What are the decisions that you make along the way? And I really want you to pay attention to those, because this is where people get hung up, because you are likely experiencing what Lee Lefevre, in his great book, I highly recommend this book, The Art of Explanation, he calls the curse of knowledge. So you're so good at doing the things you do, you might make a million little micro choices along the way without even realizing it. These are places where your people are going to get stuck because they don't know what you know. And so be sure to focus in on these decision points and identify as many as you can as you do this big picture workflow. This is the reason to start with a workflow like this, with just diagramming this out. I'm a whiteboard nut. I love to do this on a whiteboard first, and just brainstorm out all those steps and try to identify all the little decisions that you're making along the way. You'll find that you're going to have to identify for your team some principles to live by, some ways that they can make these decisions. Look inside yourself. How are you making them? What principles are you living by? In my own business for years, I used what I called the C test, S-E-E. And I would tell my guys, if it's safe, if it's efficient, and if it's ethical, it's probably okay for you to do it. And that way, when they're in the moment and I'm not standing there, they have some principles to live by that they can actually make choices and keep moving. You're going to have your own that are based on your values, your business, the things you want your people to use to make these decisions. Jot those down as you come across them as you're creating your workflow so that you can be ready to give them to your team. So what we're creating today, the elements of an effective system: a clear result that you've worked on, clear standards clear accountability is going to come through creating that workflow. You're going to identify who does what in this workflow. So you can create some clear accountability of who's taking what steps. And then, of course, the clear steps in the process that get the result. And we'll talk more about developing a list of what's needed to get those results. So let's do another breakout session. And you're going to take the results and standards that you've worked on, and you'll start working on your workflow diagram. What are the major steps? In your workbook, there should be a nice blank page for you to scribble on. If not, use something handy. Stand up and use a whiteboard if the people in your group can see you. But think through these major steps and pay close attention to the decisions that are going to need to be made to actually keep moving forward. Or now, what I would suggest you do in your small groups, you don't have to do this, you can work individually if you want, but maybe choose one person in the group, choose their issue, and brainstorm their steps with them. And that way you'll all get an experience and get to hear the input and the thoughts of the people in your group. Remember, we're not trying to get your piece built today. We're trying to give you the skills to be able to build your piece later. We don't have enough time to build the whole thing out today anyway. So Rebecca, go ahead and sweep us all into our breakout rooms and let's get started. Okay, we back? Give me a thumbs up, Jerry. All right. Sorry about that all. I want to recognize something if we jump into our third part of our third section today, and that is, as Jerry and I were talking in our little two-person breakout room, this is a lot. It's like drinking from a fire hose. We're really jumping into just really a heavy, involved topic, something that's, you're not going to get all of this done in one day. There's just no way. And, hopefully you can kind of hold back and not feel too overwhelmed as we get into this today. And also be in a place where you know that there's going to be other opportunities for you to get some support in this. So we talked about our results, our standards. Now we've talked about laying out the initial steps in your workflow. Hopefully that was a little bit eye-opening. What I find is most people find a lot more little micro decisions going on than you at first thought there were. And those are so critical because, like I said, they're the places that people are going to get lost or not how to proceed on their own without you. So we're getting close to the finish line now. And for today, at least, you have a lot of work to do after today. But as far as our framework goes, our framework of identifying the results and standards, identifying the workflows, and then the step-by-step process, this last piece, often I'll ask people, how long is a marathon? And what I usually get back is 26 miles. And that's easy for conversation, but the truth is it's not 26 miles, it's 26.2 miles. And if you don't go that 0.2, then you're not going to finish the marathon. I personally think they added the 0.2 just in case the 26 didn't kill you in the process. The 0.2 finishes you off. But sometimes business owners will tell me that they're frustrated because they've created systematic ways of doing things, but no one uses them. Well, that's what this 0.2 is all about. How do you create a way to train, support, and mentor your people? This is a time investment that some of you brought up when I asked about what it seemed like to empower your people with systems. And it is an investment. It is an investment of time. So how do we equip people? And the great thing is the workflow that you started working on in your breakout session is going to be your guide to identify the things that people need to be able to do what you want them to do. And there's really three major categories to this. There's tools and supplies, we'll call it, information and authority. And there may be more than these, but these are the major players that you want to identify out of your workflow. So tools and supplies can be anything from a computer, software, physical tools sometimes, if you're in, say, a trade-related business. Really, you want to look at the workflow and say, what are all the things that someone's going to need? To use our invoicing example that we've been using, it could be documents. Maybe there's an invoice template document that they need to use to create the invoice that you want to go out. Really identify anything and everything that's going to be needed in this workflow. The second is information. So I've hopefully driven home very strongly this morning how important these little decision points are. Information is critical. So what information are they going to need to be able to make these decisions? And if it's info they have to get from somewhere else, you need to identify that. Where will they get it? Make a note of that. Don't make a note though, because this is cheating. Don't make a note that has them always coming back to you. That's cheating. That won't save you from having to always be in the middle of things. And that won't empower them. That's the opposite of empowerment, is making it all come back through you. I like my good friend Rick Boyle. I don't know if he's with us this morning. He and I have this ongoing conversation about how project management is really information management. It's about making sure all the right people know all the right things at all the right times. So what information is your team going to need to execute on your plan? The last one is authority, and authority is a fun one, because what decision-making authority, here's giving up control, right? All of you who chatted in that giving up control is difficult, and I get it. What authority are you going to give people, or what do they need to have? Because it's not fair to them to ask them to do the work if they don't have the authority to do what they need to do. What authority do they need to have to do their work? And your workflow shows the decisions they'll need to make. You'll have to get clear about what authority it is that they're going to need to be able to make those. And along with that, when should they ask for help? What are the limits of their decision-making authority? That needs to be clearly stated as well. When should they be asking for direction from you or from their manager? Again, don't cheat. Don't run it all back through you, or you're just going to still be really, really busy. Now, every time the idea of authority and decision-making comes up for me, it always brings up for me the idea of cultural safety. So is your culture, your workplace, a place where people feel safe to try new things and to make mistakes? Because if they're going to try new things and they're going to have authority to make decisions, they're going to screw up. Let's face it. Even if we're doing it ourselves, we're going to screw up now and then. So how are people treated in your organization when a mistake is made? What are you doing to actively encourage people to make decisions and let them know that it's okay to make a mistake, of course, when they're honestly working hard at getting it right? And what are you possibly doing? This is a really critical thing to ask yourself. Look in the mirror. What are you possibly doing, even unintentionally, that might be making your team hesitate to make decisions and bring them all to you? There can very often, we do things as managers that we don't even realize we're doing, that creates a space where people just don't feel safe making decisions. They'll always come back to you for anything of any consequence if that's the case. So again, that's the opposite of truly empowered. Let's talk a little bit about training now. A training strategy is critical. And this is the point too that often gets dropped. Your training strategy should be written down, thought out, planned out, put on the calendar. Who's going to need to be trained? What are they going to need to be trained? And again, you can look at your workflow. Once you've created that workflow, you can look at that and see the skills it's going to take to need to do each one of those. And then create a plan for who's going to need to be trained. What's the best way to train them? Do they need to do it in person? Can they do it remotely? Do they need to do it on the job? And then the most critical piece about training, it requires repetition, likely from you, not just the person being trained. If you go to the gym and try to get all your results in one trip, you're just going to get really sore and not actually get the results that you want. It requires repetition. So training, training, training. When you set up your training strategy, be sure that it includes enough repetition that your people are actually have an opportunity to learn what they need to learn. I've had people say to me over the years many times, tell me something once and I got it. I get their good intention with that. The truth is that almost never is true, because when we learn new things, it takes repetition to learn them. So along that line, think about coaching and support and mentoring. What are you going to do to come back? And in a way, you could also add the word accountability to this. How often are you going to come back to make sure that your team members' training is going well, that they're actually learning what they need to learn. How will they ask for help? Be very clear with them about how you want them to ask you for help. Whatever your follow-up rhythm is, set it down, create something in writing, put it on a calendar, because it's like the friend you have that you always say, oh, I'll just check in from time to time and see how they're doing. That's like the friend that says, hey, we should get together for lunch sometime. Every time you see them, but then you never actually have lunch, do you? Because it never actually gets scheduled. So your coaching and follow-up support plan, put it on your calendar. Do not just go, well, I'll check in when I bump into them. That's not a support plan. That's not a plan, period. That's a hoping I bump into them when they actually need me. And make it clear between you and the team, when will I check in? This can sound overwhelming. It doesn't have to be. It can be, I'm gonna call you on the phone for 30 minutes or 15 minutes once a week. And by the way, I think it's important and a great way to establish some responsibility is to ask that team member who's the one being mentored to be the one instigating the call to you at times, so that they're the ones who are coming to you for the mentoring and the support, not just you always coming to them. It also makes it feel less like babysitting to them too. So back to something I said before, remember that everyone comes to you pre-packaged with, this is the way I've always done it. And if you don't give them a clear way we do it here, why would they do it any other way? This is also a great reminder that in most cases, you're not trying to convince your team to do the work the right way, the quote unquote right way. Right is a symbolic expression, right? Like we talked before. You're almost always, not every time, but almost always trying to break the habits or change the habits that people already have in place to get them to do something different than they're used to doing. So it's usually not that they're unmotivated, that they're lazy, that they're stupid. If you got the wrong person, it could be, but it's almost always that they just have a habit of doing it one way, and you're trying to help support them in getting them to do it and see it in another way. If you've ever tried to start an exercise routine, go on a diet, lose weight, you get that. It's difficult for you too. In fact, what I'm asking you to do this morning is go about empowering your team in a different way. That's going to take some discipline and some work and some habit change on your part. And that's really what you're trying to do for your team as well. So for this last breakout session, we're going to sweep in one more time, work on creating our strategy for training, creating our strategy for mentoring and support. And I want you to value this just as highly as everything else that we've done. So get into your groups, get into your workbooks. Rebecca, you can go ahead and sweep us away. Okay, Rebecca's giving me the all clear. You should all be back. Welcome back again. I want to acknowledge that with we're running just a little off time. I was doing pretty well until I had a bit of a hiccup in my connection. So we're at 10:37 your time. If you do have to jump off, we're pretty much wrapped up. Just going to conclude with a couple of words about some help you can get in following up with some conduit round groups. I also want to acknowledge we really went over a lot this morning in terms of this is a lot of work. It just is. What I was hoping for you to take away today really was a framework of how to go about doing this work, so that you can start to fill in the blanks yourself as you start to work on it. Jerry, I'm going to let Jerry tell you a little bit about how you can get involved with some of the conduit roundtables. We're going to dedicate those over, I think, Jerry, you said the next month or two, to taking what we started in this meeting and carrying that forward into those roundtables, so you can actually bring your workbook and keep working on what you've created. So we're gonna stay late to do some questions, but I just want to acknowledge that if you do have to get out, I respect. Now, the last thing I want to do though is to, as I said about your training and your mentoring for your team, don't underestimate your own need for that. So create a strategy for completing this work. How many times have you gone to a seminar or a webinar, or read a book and thought, wow, that's great information? And then it usually takes probably 2 weeks for it to find a garbage can because you don't actually dive in and get into it and actually make something happen. Remember, knowledge is not power. Turning knowledge into action is power. And so create a plan. Today, as soon as you get off this call, put on your calendar, work on whatever your issue you brought to today's meeting or whatever you started working on in today's meeting. Put that on your calendar, work on this, even if it's in some 30-minute time blocks. Don't underestimate the fact that as you're thinking about how to train and mentor and move your people in a new way, you have to be doing that for yourself. Invest in yourself. Create a plan, schedule the time to move this forward. We gave you a framework today. You have a lot of work to do now. So, Jerry, would you say a couple things about, would you say a couple things? I've got a quick question from somebody I want to answer real fast first, but I'd like you to say a couple things about how people can get involved and the times and so forth, and if they email you or whatever on the groups. Jake slacked in and said, will you be sending the slides? Would love to take a look. Jake, we're going to have this whole recording available. I think we can also have a PDF of the slides available for you as well. So that's not a problem. We'll include that or a link to download that with the email, including the recording. So Rebecca, if you'd make a note of that to make sure that we do that. I'm not writing notes as I talk. Jerry, you're on.
Yeah.
Tell us about how and when we can get into Conduit roundtables.
Yep, real quick, thank you for the generosity of your time, Paul and Rebecca, and your insight and your wisdom. And you're a microcosm of the tribe. You know, one of the things that we talk about with the Conduit tribe is it's incredibly generous people sharing wisdom and insight from the front line. And so you're with, you know, that guy said you're looking for people looking for you. And for me, this tribe is made up of people that I respect, like you and many others, and that so generously give of your wisdom and your time. So we do have some small groups that we'll send out a link to a bunch of different groups that you can join. There's no charge. The barrier to entry is just you basically willing to show up. We have point of contacts for each of the groups. There's men's groups, there's women's groups. And the objective would be, as I was a seminar junkie as a youth, and I've got a library full of content that I just haven't implemented. So the purpose of the small groups, which will be 1 hour long, twice a month, will be for you if you want to jump in to get some support, some encouragement, some accountability, which I need, and help flesh out some of these ideas and implement it. So that's a quick little summary, Paul.
Perfect. Thanks so much. And, you know, I frequent one of these roundtables along with Jerry and Rick Boyle, and Brad is in there, and Brent Crank, just great guys. I can't say enough too about the generosity and the sharing that goes on in these groups. I mean, they're just wide open. They're authentic. People show up ready and willing to help each other. So hop in, check it out. We're going to be focusing on continuing the work we started here today. So really encourage you to do that. It's a great group of guys or gals, depending on which one you're in. So as I said, I know some of you might have time commitments. You got to run. I'm going to actually take this slide down so I can see all of you in a second. But if you have questions, want to contribute to the discussion, go ahead and you can use the raise hand button. Rebecca, I think they can use the raise hand button. Is that right? To raise their hand. There we go. Now I think I can see everybody.
And then Rebecca has supreme authority over all of us and can.
That's right. Yeah, so if you want to ask a question or contribute, there's at the bottom of your Zoom bar, there's a reactions icon. You click on that reactions icon, you can hit raise hand and it'll raise your hand and Rebecca can unmute you so you can talk. Share anything you want, ask any question you want, as long as it's not too personal about Jerry, because I don't want to hear the answer. Gosh, I moved that and didn't turn up a question. Raise your hand if you feel overwhelmed by all of this.
Me.
Okay, I'll just raise my hand. How's that? Yeah, Andrew, yes. Yeah, it can be overwhelming. It definitely can. Good. Well, I see people filtering out. I know we got to get on with our days. Happy to stay in chat if anybody.
I'll pose a question, Paul. What is you coach a lot of people. What are some of the biggest stumbling blocks as far as people sticking with it?
Hmm. It's not what I thought you were going to ask until you got to the end of the question. The sticking with it is simply habit change. It's exactly what we're trying to get our team to do, is change the way they're doing something to a way that's unified with the way you want it done in the business. And for us, it's exactly the same thing. We have a habit of coming to work, the same things stimulate us and draw our attention one direction versus another direction. So we don't follow through and actually defining clear results, defining the workflow system, because hey, it takes time. There's no two ways about it. There's no magic wand that goes boom and you've got this thing finished. It does take work. You have to actually carve out the time. In our eMyth program, we always tell people an hour a day. You got to start there. Give us an hour a day. So you block out an hour a day on your calendar to work on this. If you did that with what we did this morning, of course, depending on how big of an issue you're tackling in the business, you'd be shocked how quickly you'd actually come up with a good solution. If you put it just an hour a day into it. I bet after 2 weeks, you'd be pretty close to ready to implement something and start mentoring and training it with your team. And that's what's important. So Rebecca, Brent has his hand raised. If you can unmute Brent Crank, please. Brent, you might have to unmute yourself after she unmutes you.
I got it.
Hey, Brent.
My question is, hey, appreciate you guys doing this. My question is, as we come up with ideas for whether it's a training program, when being an entrepreneur, I have an idea a minute and I want to go implement that or present it to my team. I just wanted to see from your experience, what's the best way to present a new strategy or a new plan to your team so that they receive it in the same positivity that you intended it in?
Sure. That's a great question because it plays right to the title of this session, Truly Empowered. You want to empower your people, not boss them, right? And good people don't need to be bossed. They want to be empowered. They want you to give them what they need to be successful at what they're doing in your business. A lot of people at the beginning of the session chatted in about talking about the why. Why am I doing this? Well, your people want to know that too. So step one, I would say, Brent, is take time to really flesh it out a bit yourself, do some initial workflow thinking so you understand how it connects to everything else. And then when you go to them about it, explain to them, this is why I think this is important, how it's going to help us as a team succeed, how it's going to help you as an individual be better at do your job better. Again, a lot of times they may go, yeah, but I'm getting that result now. But they may not understand the connection. I always think of all these things as a series of inputs and outputs. And so if I think of it on a large scale, your marketing and lead generation has an output, which is a qualified lead, and that's an input to your sales system. Well, your people live in that world too. So how is what you're asking me to do, Brent, going to help me give me a better input or give me a better output? And sometimes the better output is your output fits what the next person is doing better, not necessarily quality better, but it's better for the overall team and how the work flows through the business. They need to understand that context. Otherwise, why in the world are they motivated to change what they're doing? They're getting good if they're getting good results right now. So that was kind of a long-winded answer, but really the short version is help them understand why it matters to the business and to them, and then engage them in actually coming up with the right solution. It's why I like actually doing a real rough draft of that workflow. And at that point, getting your team involved. Once you have a good, clear result, you've identified a few standards, and you've done that big picture workflow, don't go into writing out step-by-step tiny details yet. Go and start talking about that bigger picture workflow. Because once they're contributing to it, then their buy-in is going to be so much better because they actually get heard. Does that answer your question? Long-winded answer.
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, good. We're dwindling by the minute. Any small group is a great way to have questions and discussion. Anybody else have something?
I got a question.
Go ahead.
I got my hand raised. How, and certainly if anybody else wants to jump in, you and I've talked about people that are, which a lot of people on this call are unconsciously competent, like they've been doing it so long that they're so good. I think of Brent Crank, right? He's so good at the stuff he's good at. He's so unconsciously competent that, you know, that I would imagine that hinders people from, when you're systematizing, that could get in the way for many of us.
It definitely does. It reminds me of a carpenter that worked with me for years, and I asked him one day to describe to me how to install and trim a door. And this guy's installed and trimmed thousands of doors brilliantly. They look great. But when he stood there and looked at it for a minute, and then he looked back at me after about 2 minutes of silence and said, maybe I'm just not great at describing things. So this was an example of a guy who was really skilled at doing the work, but it just didn't come out of his mouth in a way that he could describe it to someone else. And it's pretty common for us to be so unconsciously good at something that we've created all kinds of shortcuts. We know the steps so well, we do them without even thinking about them, that it does get hard. It's the reason that my belief is you should get these things about what you think is 75% complete and start using them. Put them in an innovation cycle. The first time you use it, you'll discover a bunch of stuff you missed. The second time, you'll discover a couple more and a couple more. And then that's how you refine it, actually getting it in place and start using it. And, I always joke that I'm a recovering perfectionist. That's the part that's hard for me.
Yeah.
Is going, well, this doesn't feel complete, but I'm going to go ahead and let people start doing it.
Yeah.
And that's always the hard part.
You didn't mention this today, but I know when we did the podcast on this a couple months ago, you and I, when we got to the end of this, we said the hardest part of this whole thing is the last stage, like the accountability, right? Where you've got to be willing to confront or put the results in front of those in your charge, right, Brent? Here you put it in front of your guy or your gal, and they didn't get the results, and then you come to find out that they didn't follow the agreed upon procedure, and that is so frustrating.
The thing I love about what you said, though, Jerry, is when you have this structure in place and the clarity that it brings, accountability gets easier, because it's easy to go, I can come to you and say, Jerry, here's the result we're after in these standards, and we're not getting it. You're not hitting it. What makes accountability hard is when you say, Jerry, you should do this way, or make this step that way. Use your left hand, not your right. It literally gets into that kind of conversation sometimes. That's where it gets emotional and bickering, right? But if I can say to you, Jerry, invoices aren't going out by noon on Friday, and they're not in the correct PDF format. The next thing out of my mouth can be, what help do you need to start doing that? So we can focus the accountability at developing the person and finding out what their gaps they have are in their training or their, whatever it is they have, rather than coming to them and saying, you suck because you didn't do this right. Now, let's be honest, we could get to a point where after enough times of that, we might have to say, look, you're not getting the result, and you're the wrong person for the job, apparently, and we've got to move on to someone else. I'm not saying accountability goes away and that you never have to have a situation where you say, we've got to replace this person, they're the wrong person. But more unfortunately, I think there's a lot of times where the accountability part just gets ugly. Someone quits or gets fired because the structure and clarity wasn't there to be able to have the conversation about the real thing. I like the phrase, let's kick the problem around, let's not kick each other around. And if you start kicking the problem around, you're very often going to find the solution that you need. And sometimes, though, you're going to have to let someone go. I mean, that's just the way it is. Yeah. Hiring is not a perfect science, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. Jessie Kinney just responded to that. And I wonder if she has a document that she's allowed or willing to share. Balsher, we implemented a document called a Code Blue. And whenever we missed the mark, we didn't get the results that we wanted, we sit down with the individual and we go through a quick Code Blue, and we're trying to determine, is it that the person needs training of the procedure? They just haven't been trained well enough? Do we need a different procedure? Is the procedure old and outdated that we need a new procedure? or was it some kind of negligence or oversight? And those going into those meetings, they can be very daunting, because unfortunately, many times it's negligence or oversight, but it's not always that case. Yesterday, we had a challenge, and we did a code blue, and we were able to actually implement a new procedure to reduce the likelihood of that happening again. So having a tool at the back end of it to navigate that conversation has been really helpful as well. I don't know, Jesse, if you have.
I love the idea of having the tool too, Jerry, because when you say we're going to do a code blue on this, your employees know exactly what that means. It's not,
Yeah.
it's less likely to feel like an attack on them personally.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah, definitely. That's a tough one. Accountability is such an emotional thing for so many people because it has such negative undertones and negative history to it. But the fact of the matter is, I believe that good people want accountability. They want to be held to high standards because they hold themselves to high standards. Yeah.
It's good.
Good. We've dwindled to a small group. I think we're probably ready to sign off. Anybody else? Anything else from anyone? Appreciate all your time and appreciate you hanging out with us today. These are always so fun to do. All good? Everybody's good? Ready to get on with your days?
Start. Time
That's
for
right.
lunch.
Start. It's not lunchtime in Arizona. I'm going for breakfast though. All right. You guys all have a wonderful day. Thanks so much.
Good job, Paul. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks, Jerry.
Well done.